It's your brother from the ancient mother, UBISI, giving you another Headspace album review. We're talking about a cat who's part of a local hip-hop crew, and I say local, I say EC, that made monumental strides in being one of the most formidable collectives that the Eastern Cape has ever seen. I'm talking about the OTE, of the elite, consisting out of cats like Isaac Wilson, M2 Kane, led of course by Uluesta. This was a crew which really showed us that you have to be more than a group, but you have to be a movement and galvanize on people that identify with you, and do it by understanding what it is about you that speaks to your particular audience. So D-Obs gives us this latest project, really a feast to devour. UBISI NOBUSI, milk and honey, translated. Now, for those familiar with the concept, I'm sure it rings biblical tones of the idea of a utopia, a paradise, a promised land, the biblical symbolic promise of better times. And I think with that in mind, it feels like D-Obs is hinting towards that. He's saying his career has taken him to a place where he's reflecting on what is yet to come, reflecting on the promise of a better life, the promise of a better experience, the promise of a future that he's taken in a very optimistic stride, seeing things that have happened in the past. Now, this project is brief, and I want to say something about it, is that it has been said, think local, act global. And I feel like something curiously creative happens when artists have the courage to take their indigenous quality and not ride the global wave by dissolving their local identity, but move first and foremost with it and affirm their unique locality to the rest of the world. I feel like that's how you win the game of this greater success or hype to be heard by people beyond your home country. Now, why am I talking about this shit? I'm talking about it because D-Ob's album feels so undeniably global. It is neo-soul. It's a neo-soul project. It's got these smooth textures of warm, loving, embracing, somewhat romantic tones of like a very intimate space. This album feels like sleeping in a bed of roses and just floating away in fantasies of your most intimate longings. And I think that's what he does throughout this whole project. It feels like Obs is talking more about the idea of milk or honey than actual direct experiences that come from his life. There's not a lot of anecdotal rapping here. There's not a lot of I went through this and that, and as a result I am saying this. There is poetic allusion. There's a lot of banality, and that just means there's a lot of like pompous referral to certain ideas like love, to certain ideas like reconciliation, coming together, weaved together in like a somewhat biblical tone that doesn't make it strong and obvious. But this is definitely a man of faith. He might not be a man of definite Christian faith, but he's a man who leans a lot of his ideas of what is right from what is kind of Bible-esque. And I think the narrative that he manages to concludely bring us is saying to us that, listen, you need to kind of look at yourself, look at how you are affecting those closest to you, and that will give you a sense of the possibilities of what you can do with yourself and with others in the future. But again, it's not said directly. There's no messages where D-Obs is actually teaching or actually suggesting to the audience that this is what his experiences have taught him. It's very vague, it's very abstract, it's very mellow, it's hidden. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Really depends on what you as a music listener are looking for. If you want messages that are clear, cut and concrete, and you love artists that inform you socially, this is not the project for you. If you just want a mellow kind of easing into the environment type sound, if you're with your girl or if you're with your guy, I mean if you're with any intimate person who you are involved in that sexual, sensual sense with, this is a nice project to set the mood. It's a mood setter. It really is something to kind of play alongside candlelit dinners and reflections about life. And in that sense, I think it manages to succeed in what it aspires to be. And I think ultimately it aspired to be a project that felt sensually good, and he did it. Now, I spoke about thinking local and acting global. D-Obs is a pretty good MC, and he's an MC who, in many cuts on this joint, feels like he emphasizes his delivery and projection more on what he says, not so much how he says it. Being that this is a project that sonically is exquisite and paints out these very sensual images and tones, his South African accent is a clear sense of an artist who is mimicking a lot of the sounds he's inspired by. And I feel like when you're listening to it from a local perspective and you do have American music to compare with, it kind of does the artist a disingenuous role for them to kind of not try and break out into a place where they don't sound as globally influenced. I really feel like there's a conversation to be had about how hip-hop places us into communicative modes that are global, and that rapping involves not only projection, intention, and charisma, but also accentuation. Says a lot about who you rap for, why you rap, and it really ultimately determines the measure of who hears and fully connects with you when you rap. A lot of South Africans have twangs. I do too. And it's a byproduct of the fact that we have intermingled with whites in societies where we can finally kind of have a South Africa which is more integrated, and a South Africa which is kind of embraces a more globalist outlook. And from that, a lot of the so-called born frees have emerged with accents that have a tinge of an aspiration to be more than South African. The music we listen to and the kind of friends we have ultimately determines the kind of English accent we speak with. And when rappers rap, there's this tendency of taking it further and sounding a little bit American in our delivery. And I feel like a lot of the times when I listen to D-Obs, I'm like, had he done more of the rapping in isiXhosa, which he does on certain joints, it would have given his verses a little bit more local grounding. And because he hardly does that, it kind of feels like you're listening to a South African do his best rendition of neo-soul rap. And what it does is that, almost in the same way that Moses sent people to conquer Canaan's land, the land of milk and honey, which turned out to actually be conquered by other people by the time he got there, D-Obs is sending us to a place that is already dominated territory. He's a South African creating a niche sound for himself, but doing it in a way that still sounds like it is trying to aspire to what the American sound is. And it fails to mark him as a unique individual in this kind of space he's trying to niche out for himself. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is the beats are great, the atmosphere is perfect, the album knows what it is, but I feel like in the way that the artist represents themselves, it gets lost because the album aspires to be global, and so does the artist, but at the expense of reflecting a sense of who they are first, where they come from first. There's very little East London in this. There's very little South Africa in this. There's very little who am I. There is no location. The artist does not place themselves in this music. Again, it's all an allusion to ideas. And yeah, that can be great in other modes of art, but with music, which often happens in the personal context, it's very important to ground yourself in where you come from and to realize the subtle nuances of the people you're speaking to. So rappers in general, you need to ask yourself, who are you rapping for? Diobs in particular. And I feel like this would have been a project of great esteem and impression had he really done more to authenticate his East Londonness, his personal journey, and showed us that Milk and Honey isn't just a project about the idea of milk and honey, but really is a journey on how the young man is showing us this in his own personal life. So ultimately, I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. Like I said, solid sound, but conceptual confusion is how I'm going to put it. The ultimate impression of the album for me rings about, again, this principle of authenticity. I will continue to preach this. I feel like the only way SA rappers can win is if they play the game of their own country first. Understand your own grounding. Understand as Umshita was a Monty, or was a Garankuwa, or was a Durban, or Cape Town, wherever you're from. Pull into those immediate experiences. Let us into who you are, not so much into the influences of what you've listened to. Because again, most rappers have been influenced by Americans, but South African rappers kind of let that take too much precedence and sound American inspired and forget the context of their own country. So thank you for the album, and I hope the critique goes to a place of great reflection. Diobs, Milk and Honey, it's VJ, Headspace, what up?